verse 4. Verse 3 says, so also, when we were underage, we were in slavery under the elemental spiritual forces of the world. Verse 4, it says, but when the time was set, or the time had fully come, God sent his son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those under the law, that we might receive adoption to sonship. Yes. We're talking about Sabbath, and it's a good place to go. Because when you go to, we'll not go there, but write it, Deuteronomy 5:12-15. One of the reasons God gave them was that one. That's why when you go to the 10 Commandments, it says, remember the Sabbath. Why? Why should they remember the Sabbath? Why is it that out of all the 9 commandments, God said, do this, don't do this, don't. And when he came to the Sabbath, he used the word remember. You go to Deuteronomy 5, he tells them, remember, because something unique happened to them. And that's one of the reasons he established this commandment with them, to help them remember where they came from, that they were in bondage in Israel. So that now that you are free, you can also be a Sabbath to the poor, to the widow, to the fatherless, to the stranger. So the corresponding understanding of that is that you and I, before Jesus came, we were all under bondage to sin, death, Satan, and curse. And now that Jesus has come to redeem us, to bring us into the Sabbath. Why again do we go to entangle ourselves in the affairs of the flesh to please God? Read Deuteronomy 12. It says, observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy, as the Lord your God has commanded you. It says, 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. It says, on it you shall do no work, neither you, nor your sons or daughters, nor your male or female servants, nor your ox, your donkey, or any of your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns, so that your male and female servants may rest as you do. Please hear this. In Exodus 20, it says, remember the Sabbath. It's the same remember he uses here in Deuteronomy 5. It says, remember that you were slaves in Egypt, that your Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God commanded you to observe the Sabbath. Because me mufri nkwasumunti. I want you always to remember where you came from. That you know how faithful, how good I am. And that through that you also be good to your neighbor. And for that reason, I'm establishing Sabbath. That you will remember that once upon a time you were slaves. You were foreigners in somebody's land. As you remember, you also be good to that foreigner in your land. Where did you and I went into slavery? That we use that to celebrate that day. God was speaking to a specific people. So what is your slavery? What is my slavery now? It is slavery more than that of Egypt. There's a slavery of sin, death, and Satan. Slavery of curse. Slavery mostly of sin. Was born in a man when you now buy. Inti wo ene me ye konko asum why na beje yen eye Yesu Kristo inti ka say wo celebrate Sabbath, you must celebrate it from the understanding of Jesus and the person of Jesus. So it says now when you are celebrating, I'm the Lord of the Sabbath, that I have saved your soul. So Sabbath is beyond a day now. Sabbath is beyond a day. Even in the Old Testament, it was prophesied. Yes, it was prophesied that God has changed it. He has changed the day. People, I don't know if they read it and you know what. They don't pay attention to it. Yeah. Look at Hebrews 4. It says, 3, it says, now we know, now we have believed and entered that rest, just as God said. Yes. Over verse 4, say, for somewhere he has spoken about the 7th day in these words. On the 7th day, God rested from his works. Verse 5. And again, in the passage above, he says, they shall never enter my rest. Even in the Old Testament, the reason majority of the people got killed is because they did not believe the word of God. So to enter the rest or the Sabbath of God is that your heart must believe what God has promised. Yes. Look at verse 7. Oh, sorry, verse 6. He says, therefore, since it still remains for some to enter the rest, and since those who formerly had the good news proclaimed to them did not go in because of disobedience. He says, God has set another day. Yes. God has set another day. He said, God set another day, calling it what? Not Monday, Tuesday, not Saturday, not Friday, not Sunday. He calls it today. Hebrews 4:7. He said, God calls it what? Today. Because today is today, right? Tomorrow, by the grace of God, you'll be alive. You call tomorrow to today. Why? Because now God is dealing with the spiritual deficiency of man to restore man to himself. Because God is not flesh, God is spirit. And many people don't talk about these things. He says God set a certain day, or God set another time or a day for entering his rest. He calls it today. He says this he did when a long time ago later he spoke through who? David. This did not just come in the New Testament. It was prophesied through his servant David. And David came after Moses. So after Moses, God has set up another day called today. Through David, in the passage already quoted, he says, today, if you hear his voice, harden not your hearts. Because in this Sabbath, in this Sabbath, you don't go by observing a day. No. In this Sabbath, you are entering God himself, and you enter with your heart. That's what I told you before, that another name for Sabbath is salvation of God through Jesus Christ. Another name for Sabbath is the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's what Romans 10 says, right? If you believe with your heart, if you confess with your mouth and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you shall be saved. For with the mouth, confession is made unto salvation. And with the heart, man believes and is saved. It's the same thing here. He says, today, if you hear his voice, harden not your heart, your hand. No. It is your heart. Why? Because it is your heart that you use to enter into this. So if you use your heart to enter, what are you supposed to hear? To believe with your heart. Believe that Jesus is the Son of God. Believe that God sent him to die for your sins. And then he became your substitute. Having believed truly, now you enter into the Sabbath. That Sabbath simply means now your soul, my soul that was in perpetual darkness, now is united with the light of God through Jesus. This is the truth. If Christians will understand these things, even before we go to heaven, you begin to see that we are living heaven on earth. In your neighborhoods, you see the peace of God, the joy of God. Corruption will be out of the way. Galamsey will be out of the way. The water bodies will no longer be issue. No. The politician will always want to be a Sabbath unto the masses. Because whatever you are receiving, you're also sharing from God. That's what he's saying. So if we don't have this understanding, that is when we engage in what is called religion. What is religion? They are man-made rules instead of the divine rules of God. Yes, that's what it is. It says, verse 8 of Hebrews 4. It says, for if Joshua had given them rest, God will not what? Have spoken later about another day. Joshua came after Moses. So why after Joshua, God is still talking about another day of Sabbath? another Sabbath rest. Not a day, but Sabbath. Or another rest. Why? Because he's talking about an eternal Sabbath. An eternal Sabbath where now the soul of man is now what? In unity with the Spirit of God. Where it has life, it has light. There's no longer in prison. There's no longer sorrow. There's no longer death. There's no longer curse. There's no longer sweat for the man to labor before he eats.